Someone in podcasts asked a general audience an inspecific question: why are you interested in the Middle East? And because I've had occasions to study the aspects of the Middle East, I saw this as a fair question for a general audience to try to answer. Professor Nasser at Temple asked us to write a paper on transmissions of the West of Islam. First, I must say that I do believe in God. It's an involuntary thing. I just feel it. And I acknowledge that, but I don't believe that men are God. I believe the great works of celebration of life speak to that supernatural but involuntary feeling of faith. The Middle East starts for me as the background in some films I saw as a child, like Lawrence of Arabia. And the plight of Jews in Europe was something I thought explained the foundation of Israel. Slowly, I became more aware that French politics had disenfranchised a sizable percentage of the Muslim world, and I knew about OPEC when I was in my early teens and their conglomerate to raise oil prices to prove that they weren't pushovers to the West. King Crimson made comments about their amazing music to the effect that Sufism had inspired them. Well, we now are in a phase where productive leverage over the Israelis has broken down. Eisenhower rallied from a hospital bed to put a stop to Israel and Britain when they exploited his condition to launch an attack on the Suez when Nasser was in power. And of course, it's well known that I suspect the Beatles had a hand in pretending Lenin died and thus becoming the godfathers of politics in the 80s. Behind the scenes, behind the curtain in Pentagon Disney. So I see the attack by Iran-Contra Hamas on the supernova in the light of the fact that Israel was working with Iran-Contra. So I think that Hamas was an outsider group who were attacking Arab Spring on both sides of the fence. Both the Rave Massacre and the Gaza Massacre were establishing the domination of the royal power hand internationally, the oligarchs that includes Putin's Russia, and steamrolling or lawn mowing towards conventional warfare parameters to get rid of people through conventional warfare, which is obscene abdication of the obligations of civilization, for whom I blame Bush, among other people, for squandering the unicorn movement in an absurd doctrine of heavy-handedness in the Middle East. So one doesn't really get a chance to explore the Middle East. You see it in Casablanca, but it's always overrun by ideas of Western domination. One doesn't get to love the culture, the tapestries, the incredible architecture and calligraphy, the music of the prayers, the wisdom of the elderly, the joy of the children, because of the long shadow that Hollywood casts with all its politics. I understand where America went wrong was in recruiting the Axis scientific community. In Squirrel Hill in Forbes Terrace, there was a man when I was very, very, very young, like 5 or 6 years old, who could fix TVs. He understood how they worked. I thought that was really very impressive. The parochial scientist we know from examining Cliff Robertson's hand in the Kennedy assassination saw television cathode ray tube as a spy network into the mind of Allah. So they conjured the idea of the fetus in the womb as a satanic ritual of abortion. And Henry Wade pretended that Oswald had killed JFK to get on with this carousel club show that arrives with the Texas School Book penned by Gail Burston and Paul McCartney. The story, the true inside story of Lenin's Houdini. Because Lenin is, on one hand, the Christ that they crucified in the womb, according to the Texas School Book, and on the other hand, the spirit of Hitler forgiven as Casper. It was all planned back in this mafia traces to Fayum, a counterfeiting done at the time of World War I, the post-World War I era, when Mussolini was meeting with Griffith and so forth. And Alan Dulles is a strange man to credit with the will of Jesus, but he did put Cecil B. DeMille in charge of Radio Free Europe, and that was one of Hollywood's biblicists. So you can see why they wanted abortion legalized, because then they had a trump. They could say the liberals were immoral, degenerate, and all the things that Hitler claimed. And Nosferatu, who climbed on board saying, we're the most moral of armies. We killed JFK to protect the unborn. And so on and so forth. It's ludicrous. It's a lulu. And they call it Two Virgins Pussy Ball. And they're criminally insane. And they're putting a death row circuit internationally on sex out of wedlock. They want sex out of wedlock stopped. They want to be control of trafficking. They want the beauties confiscated and directed into their inner sanctums. And none of this consent stuff. And largely they're supported by the women who made a tender, loving exempling of the crying shame of the queer bait who was tortured and dragged through glass by the Moral Army as a little boy. Many people have remarked that what's happening in Gaza is out of control. I'm not sure it's so much out of control as in the control of the criminally insane on high. I would like to see some common sense brought to bear on this hoary, terrible issue. Food should be let in. Israel should be sanctioned if they're not going to cooperate, and all arms shipments should be halted immediately. There should be no civility towards Israelis in any capacity until they stop it. I believe it's reasonable to open the books on the history of Israel and establish firmly that an injustice occurred in the name of righting a wrong. Only then can we deal with sorting out the dignities of the future. I think that the war in the Ukraine should be brought to a halt rather than buy into the doctrine of the Knights of Resignation marching forth in the name of Casper. It's like Russia has adopted the same practical consideration that America adopted in recruiting the scientific parochial establishment of Axis Germany for their ends. I don't think I can answer the problem of birth control. That has to be brought to the table to discuss it with all the concerned parties. I don't believe that I should be used as a symbol because I'm a deaf person. I was a public school child in Pittsburgh. The civics of the matter have become a stink bomb from Trump's mania